Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about one of the big pitfalls I see in modern day investing, and that's quote unquote doing your own research. Now, it's human nature to want to do your own research in some ways because it makes you feel like you're in control, but it can cause issues. So we see it in other domains where, for example, now with the vaccine, people aren't taking the vaccine because of doing their own research, when in reality, regardless of whether they're right or wrong, most of these people aren't qualified to do their own research on this kind of issue, nor am I. But when it comes to investing, it's much more complicated because what seems like common sense actually is not common sense in reality. So I'll give you some examples. I'm going to look at two examples. So start with the ARK Fund Innovation ETF. Now, if we go up here, since 2015, if you would have put 10,000 into this ETF, you would have had 48,000. And that's versus, about 25,000 for the category and the index. So it has done very well. Yet get this, a lot of people have actually lost money in this ETF. And I'll tell you why. So let's look first of all at the performance and the investment flows. So in 2015, it got or did 3.75% versus minus 1% for the category. So it did pretty well, but it was a small fund at the time and not many people had heard of it. Then it did minus 2% versus 6% for the category. Then it did 87% versus 24% for the category, 3.5% versus minus 6% for the category, 35% versus 32%, 157% versus 39%, minus 23% versus 13%, minus 9%. Well, this is only so far this year versus minus 1.5%. So what you can see is a lot of the years weren't dramatically better or worse than the market. But this year is a standout, but it's early days. Last year is a standout because it did much worse. And 2020 is a standout because it did much better, 157% versus 39%. However, let's look here, the investment flows. So what we can see is in the early years, very few people were interested in the fund. Then it went a bit higher, but not dramatically so. Let's say here, when it was performing a bit above average. But then things went crazy around about here. When was that? That time period was 2020. I hadn't even heard of the fund before 2020, about mid-2020. And people started getting interested in this fund once they had heard it was up like 80, 100, 120% for the year, and they piled in, right? They piled in near the top. However, look what happens here. There were more people selling the fund in general since here than buying the fund. And that's when the fund has been down. So a hell of a lot of people got into the fund when it was maybe already up 140% for the year. But then they sold the fund when they thought, well, it's going down. In comparison, very few people who did quote their own research around about here would have considered buying the fund. And there's an even better example potentially than this. And this is Peter Lynch's fund. Now, the Fidelity fund in question, you can see from 1977 until 1990, it easily beat the S&P 500. $1 in the S&P 500 would have equaled 6.60%. And yet in the Fidelity fund, you would have made $28. So it almost, 4 times the return. However, if you look here on Google, you can see that since, say, 2000, it hasn't done that well. Obviously, this isn't adjusted for dividends. People would have readjusted dividends, would have done better. But in 2000, it was worth $13, and now it's worth $15, and it's regularly fallen below 13, even going to 4. However, get this, despite this fund being super famous as being one of the few funds that beat the S&P 500 consistently for a decent period of time, the mid-70s until 1990, Fidelity's own research has suggested that the average investor has actually lost money in this fund. And again, it's quite simple. What happened is very few people were interested in the fund here. A few people might have been interested here, but many people became interested here or here. And then what happened is many of them may be sold here or here. So a lot of people end up buying high and selling low because they do their own research and they say, oh, this fund has performed so well in recent times. Or even, I guess a lot of people here would have thought, well, it's outperformed from 77 all the way through to 1990. That's a long period of time. Actually, that's 13 years, and I think it outperformed 15 years in total. So it's not like it's just 1 or 2 years like Cathie Woods' fund. So this has caused issues. So my summary would be, in general, it only makes sense to do your own research if A, you're very knowledgeable about investing or reasonably knowledgeable. B, and this is quite key, you have a lot of time to do your own research. Most people don't. But let's say if somebody's a student, they're just going into investing, they want to test the waters, they've got the summer holidays, they've got months to look at a load of different research avenues. That's different, but most people don't have that. And 3, people take things with a pinch of salt. What do I mean by that last point? Some people, if they're looking for, say, I don't know, a product review, someone with common sense would say, well, if the review is coming from somebody who has a self-interest to write that review, you shouldn't take it as seriously as somebody who's independent. So for example, if you're looking for a product review about expat investing and the review has been done via an advisory firm, you probably shouldn't take that as seriously as, say, an academic paper where the academics don't have any kind of incentive to write that review. Likewise, if you've got somebody looking at it from an objective standpoint, looking at the positives or negatives, you should take it more seriously than somebody who's got a self-interest. But what often a lot of people will do is they'll go onto Google, they'll say, type in, I don't know, ARK Innovation Fund ETF, they'll look at the performance, they'll look at 1 or 2 reviews, and they'll think, wow, I've done my own research. But in reality, as per this video, it can cause a lot of problems.